So, as we continue to look at classical era empires, today we're going to take a look at the Hellenistic Empire, which of course is a Greek empire. Our topic today is the Hellenistic Empire, and our essential question continues to be how our empire is formed and maintained as we look at various empires in the classical era and try to figure out or ascertain how they actually rose to power and how they maintained their power. You probably remember from last set of notes that the Hellas are what the Greeks called themselves, and the Hellenistic Empire is of course a Greek empire, although not exactly Greek. It was formed by Alexander the Great, who is actually Macedonian. He conquers the Greeks and then Persia and a lot of other places too, and spreads Greek culture. So go ahead and make your Cornell Notes template as you see it here, and then put your notes in the note section, putting any questions you may have in the left-hand column. Now, again, you might want to stop this audio and just copy down this slide and then, press play again so that you can take additional notes on this sort of oral commentary and just add to your notes as it goes. But sadly for Philip, he was assassinated at his daughter's wedding. That's always sad. He was stabbed in the eye, of all things, and his young son, who was 21 years old, Alexander, well, he was not great at the time, but he became Alexander the Great, took over in like 336 BC, and he began to expand this empire. It started in just Macedonia, which is just north of Greece. I circled it on the previous map, and then conquered most of Greece. But then he expanded his vision to Turkey, and then onto the Persian Empire, and onto Egypt as well, to the south. Unfortunately, Alexander was something of a conqueror. He was a magnificent general. He never lost a battle, although he was only 32 when he died, so who knows what might have happened. He did not seem to be as gifted an administrator as he was a conqueror. Although, again, to be fair, we will never know. He was not yet really done conquering when he died, although, well, maybe he was done conquering. His armies had rebelled when they reached the Indus River and said, hey, we're not going any farther, bro. Let's turn around and go home. We're homesick. Let's stop this. So maybe he was done as a conqueror at that point in time, but he really didn't have any time to set up his empire per se. And again, as I mentioned before, he calls it the Hellenistic Empire, and it comes from that word Hellenes, the Greeks. They call themselves Hellenes. So Alexander the Great, he conquers this great empire, but then dies at the age of 32, basically on the cusp of all these conquests. And so what happens? Well, this empire is divided into three major kingdoms after his death. And it's, well, actually, I should say it's divided into like 6 kingdoms and then 5 kingdoms, and then ultimately it's settled on kind of 3 major kingdoms. But they're led by his generals, Ptolemy. These are his Macedonian generals, General Ptolemy, and he starts the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt. That becomes one major kingdom. Seleucus forms a kingdom in Persia, and then Antigonus forms a dynasty in Greece and Turkey. So here we see a map of the extent of Alexander's empire, at least at the time of his death, and you can see that it extends all the way to the Indus River in in India, all the way to the east. It extends all the way to Egypt in the south. It encompasses Greece, it encompasses Turkey, and all this area is the Persian Empire. So pretty extensive for that point in time. It was actually the largest land empire of the time until the creation of the Roman Empire. So in this slide, you can see the division of Alexander's empire after his death. And here you see like 5 different kingdom divisions. As I mentioned, it kind of solidifies into 3 eventually, with most of this portion all being ruled by Antigonus, okay, which is the green. right there. In purple, of course, you can see the kingdom of Ptolemy in Egypt, and that remains there until conquered by eventually the Romans. In Seleucus's empire over here, he rules over most of Persia until they too are at least conquered in the western part by the Romans, and then a certain portion of the Seleucid Empire sort of slinks off to the east and survives for a little bit longer, but not much longer beyond initial Roman conquest. So the Hellenistic Empire, which only lasted a handful of years at best, until Alexander died in 323 BC. I can't really speak too much to that because he didn't really administrate over that empire, but the kingdoms that resulted from that empire I can talk a little bit about. They all were dynastic monarchies, as you can is written there in that top bullet point there. And they were all ruled over essentially by Macedonian generals, and Macedonians considered themselves Greek. Although Greeks didn't necessarily consider the Macedonians Greek. It's sort of like the Greeks looked at the Macedonians as like rednecks, you know what I mean? Like heathens, a little bit rough. They're sort of roughnecks. But still, Alexander himself had been tutored by Aristotle, so he had significant Greek training and knowledge of Greek philosophy and schooling and that kind of thing. And he spread, as a result of his conquests, he actually spreads Greek culture and learning throughout the world, throughout much of the known world at that time, through the Middle East and into Egypt. However, the result is that, of course, the treatment of conquered peoples, as I mentioned there, there is a certain degree of discrimination against non-Greeks as they're being ruled over by Greeks or Macedonians. If you were Greek in ethnicity, then you did have a leg up in these empires. But ultimately, over time, over a long period of time, there's a lot of cultural mixing and mingling. In fact, Alexander himself takes a Persian wife in order to fuse Greek tradition with Persian tradition, and encouraged his generals and his soldiers to do the same, to marry Persian women, to literally have sort of a physical cultural mixing there. And so that eventually happened over time, where Egyptian ideas and culture melded with Greek ideas, and Persian ideas sort of mix with Greek ideas as well. We've talked before about the importance of maintaining an empire and developing infrastructure, and economy is one really important way of maintaining an empire. So extensive trade occurred between these kingdoms, and ultimately between the newly rising state to the east, known as Rome, or the Roman city-state as well. But that's an important component, creating infrastructure and promoting trade, because that promotes prosperity. And when everybody is fat and happy, then no one is dissatisfied with government. And so governments survive when economic prosperity is in sort of one of the things that they're able to do for their people. Ultimately, the decline for all these kingdoms that resulted from the Hellenistic Empire, decline came from as a result of Rome, that little city-state far to the east. So sort of your textbook calls it a rags to riches story, and it is, grows from city-state to this enormous, the largest empire of its age, and one of the largest empires in history. And it conquers most of these kingdoms. As I mentioned, it certainly conquers the Antigonid kingdom that encompassed Greece and Turkey, conquers the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt. It does defeat the Seleucid kingdom, or the Seleucid dynasty of Persia, and a remnant of the Seleucids slink off far to the east. But really their decline comes at the hands of the Romans. What's important about this whole era is Alexander provides sort of a bridge between Greece and Rome. So the Romans are going to adopt most of Greek culture, or much of Greek culture, certainly the art, their architecture, their religion, some of their styles of dress, their philosophy. They're going to adopt aspects of that, and a lot of that is because Alexander spread that culture around the known world at the time. So that's an important concept. Even though Alexander himself was short-lived, his empire itself was very short-lived. Its impact is long-lived and tremendous. So what I'd really like you to do right now is take a minute and interact with those notes that you just took. Circle, star, highlight anything that you think is important, be it vocabulary or key concepts or whatever. Interact in the left-hand margin. Again, if you have questions that you'd like to ask me in class, then make sure you put them in the left-hand margin, and we will address those soon.